Okay, today we're looking at a little bit more in depth on copyright and intellectual property. There were some good questions about that. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. So our discussion is going to center on the same standard we used that last time, which was that we need to understand the regulatory and statutory requirements of our work, and we have to consider those whether the client knows about them or not. It's our job to know about them, and that's a hard thing to do, especially when you're just starting out. And so we're going to take one of the most basic ones that affects our work, maybe more than some others. We don't have a lot of safety regulations on our work and things like that. But we have a lot to do with ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and a significant amount of statutory and regulatory work around copyright and intellectual property. So this week we're going to talk about intellectual property, and probably next week we'll talk about Americans with Disability Act, because it really is important, and that's one of the things that is key to your success as an intern, is learning about these things before you get surprised with them at your workplace once you're in the professional working world outside of school. So here's what we've got. Intellectual property rights are a big deal. Copyright is a little bit iffy. There's a lot of background on it, and there's tons of stuff. But let's talk about intellectual property all on its own. Okay, intellectual property means that somebody didn't make something, you don't have a physical thing, but they thought it up. It's their intellectual property. Now, if you did that on the basis of your work, and it was supported by your work, and the purpose was for your work, you don't own that intellectual property. Your employer does. Now, at American River College, we own all of the work that you do for us. However, we have a pretty open intellectual property sort of stance, in that if you want to go make money on that, you go ahead and make money. You can reuse it. You can do whatever you want with it, so long as it's legal. We let you treat it as if it was yours. The only thing that you cannot do is claim license over it yourself. You cannot put a more restrictive license on it yourself. Although you could make a derivative work from it, and that you could put a more restrictive license on. So most employers have a very strict intellectual property agreement that you must sign, and you can understand why. You can't give out trade secrets. They're paying you, you're working for them. You just can't go give that information to anybody else. So that's an important part. You have to know and respect the intellectual property rights of your employer and anybody else you might be dealing with. And we do that a lot here in the Design Hub. If you've looked up a picture, or if you've looked up some text, or if you've used music, somebody else did that work. That was somebody else's intellectual property. Unless you made it yourself, it's somebody else's intellectual property. And we have to be knowledgeable about what their thoughts are, who can use it and who can't, their licensing agreement. And we have to be respectful of that. Okay? And you can imagine, just for yourself, if you write some code, or if you make a drawing, or if you create something, and somebody just grabs it and uses it and makes a ton of money, what a rip off to you. Or even if they don't make much money, it's still a rip off to you. And we want to really protect that as much as we can. So we will often look for free stuff that we can use however we want. But often when you see something, we'll just go pay for it. So let's talk about how all that works. Let's look first at copyright basics. What does copyright mean? And I found this. It's from it's copyright.gov. So it's some government person put this out. And I find that it's fairly useful. We've been doing this for a while. So it's a form, copyright is a form of protection for authors of original works, of authorship. So it doesn't say that it applies to music or photos or it's authorship. If you authored it. Now you have to kind of think a little bit about what that means to author something, especially if you're working as a team, but you get kind of the idea. If it's your creation, okay, it can be protected. So, what's eligible? What are the rights? Who can claim it? How long does it work? So here's the types of things that it can be done. Literary works, music, drama, pantomimes and choreograph, pictorial graphics, sculptures, motion pictures, sound, architectural works. All of these can be done, okay? And they be viewed broadly. They're not saying that so for a computer program, for example, certain compilations can be registered and some can't. Maps and technical drawings can be registered. Okay. Now, the more exacting your piece is, the more closely people will look at it and be able to use generalizations. Okay. And so here's a little thing. Here's an important note. Before 1978, you would secure it by publishing it with an appropriate copyright notice. Okay, so anything that was in the public domain on or before January 1st remains in the public domain. Okay, so if it was in the public domain before that, okay, so that's a little note. Now, what are the rights of the copyright owner? Okay, you have, as the copyright owner, an exclusive right to do all these things: reproduce, okay, prepare derivatives, distribute, publicize, display, perform. So all of those things are done. Okay. Copyright does not protect just general ideas, methods. Like if you come up with a new method that says, I hold the pen in my right hand and my left hand so I can click both buttons at once and I'm really fast. You can't copyright that method. Or if you create a method of, for example, a spreadsheet that has a method of doing a calculation that says first I do this, then I do this, then I do this. So you can't do methods, things like that. If there's no tangible form, okay? And so, like, if you have a dance in your head and you haven't done it yet, there's no tangible form. If you have an idea of something, there's no tangible form. Okay? You can't do titles. All right? Stairway to Heaven. You can't copyright that. That's a title. Familiar symbols or designs. If it's become familiar and you try to copyright it, you can't. So there's all sorts of cool stuff like that. You can read this. Who can claim copyright? Whoever created the work. Okay. This is interesting. Each author's individual contribution is separate and distinct. So that's if you have a compilation of stories or things like that. Works made for hire are generally exceptions to claiming copyright. That's why if you do something and you're paid while you're doing it, you don't get to claim copyright for it. Okay, so that's interesting. So here are some examples of that. Hey, Tristan, I'm just going over this really quick. So transfer cost. So you can look at some of this stuff. Termination. So these you're not going to need to worry about. How long does it last? The life of the author plus 70 years. So every year there's a list published of what becomes copyrightable. Okay, how do you protect your work? Here's the important thing. Copyright exists automatically once it is fixed in a tangible medium. Okay, so you don't have to do anything to be protected by copyright as soon as it's in a tangible medium. However, if you want to make sure and you really want to make it known and make it obvious, you can apply to the Copyright Office and register your work. Okay, and that's not required, but it sure helps if you've got that notice on there and somebody uses part of your work. It's much easier to show that that was your work, it was your intent not to let people use it, and things like that. So there's some basics, and there's some more you can read, but that's a nice little thing on that. And so where do you go then to get stuff that's okay to use? How do you know? Because just by seeing something on the web, that's a tangible form, and so there's copyright on it. You may not just go clipping stuff off the web. It's wrong, and it violates intellectual property rights. You just aren't allowed to do it. There's a few exceptions. But let's see where you can go to get some. So one place is called Creative Commons. Another is Wikimedia. There's all sorts of places that are like this. But if you look at Creative Commons, they have a set of licenses. Let's see if I can find their licenses. They keep changing this darn thing. Use it, share your work. Wow, what happened to their? There it is. Thank you. They move that stuff around all the time. There talks about attribution, all this kind of stuff. Well, no. Where are all the different licenses listed? I hate it when they do stuff like this. Maybe it's under what we do. Creative Commons licenses. There they go. This is what people want. Why do they bury it 5 deep? What a terrible job on their website. Anyway, so Creative Commons has made licenses, and there's a kind of a machine license, and then the license you can see and understand. Okay, and they've got these little pictures for them, and you can put these on your work, and it becomes real obvious because people can go here and figure it out. Okay, so CC BY means that people can distribute, remix, adapt, build upon. They can do all sorts of stuff so long as attribution. That means they say who made it. Attribution. Okay? And it allows for commercial use. People can even make money off of it. So if you use CC BY as your license, or you see something with CC BY on it, it means that when you use their work somewhere in your work, you have to give credit to this person for using that work. That's why videos always have credits at the end, and books have credits at the end. And any of our work, we have to have a place where we hold these. And so you always, in your transmittal, have to have a link to the page that gives us license to use it. That's why on the final transmittal, on the approved, there's a spot for a link for license, and we have to be able to follow it back and find out that yes, we are allowed to use this. So here's a whole bunch of different ones that you can use, and you can find stuff on here. You can go to share your work, and you can choose a license, and you can look for things. You can go to the thing and find out all sorts of stuff, but you can look up something's license according to Creative Commons and find out. So like usually if you go on to Thingiverse or something like that, if it's free and you click on the license, it takes you to that page right there, and it explains exactly what your license ability is to download and 3D print that object. Okay, so that's how Creative Commons works. They're usually free work, not always, but Creative Commons are usually free. And by looking up the license level, it tells you what you're allowed to do. Another one that's similar is Wikimedia, and it's specifically for images. And they have the same type of a thing. What kind of license are you have? And what are you allowed to do? And so when you look at those, when you download one, it always sends you with the license in a README or in a link. Okay, so that's the how do you go about getting it. So just because it says it's free does not mean that you're allowed to do it. Just because a website says you may use the website, 9 times out of 10, they're wrong. They have included works on their website that they are violating the license on. I see it time and time and time again. I've put this great website together, and you can use it because it's educational, and that means it's free. Not. Okay? You have to be very careful. And if you take a snip of somebody's work from one of those websites, you are violating the original author's intellectual property rights. Okay, so watch those things and be careful of them. Now, there's some places where you can go that just make it real easy. Copyright Clearance Center is an example of one of those, where you can go to their website and you can just look something up. I'm going to look up who's an author that let's look up Arthur C. Clarke, and we'll just see if he's got anything in here. Author Arthur C. Clarke. Nope. Okay. It says that they don't have any. So he doesn't have any that are free to use. Okay. Sometimes you can find stuff on here. Let's see if there's a Steinbeck in here. Look at all this stuff from Steinbeck that we can use. Now, Steinbeck, a lot of his stuff is not free for use, but you can get a pay-per-use option. And you can figure it out. And you can look around. And are you photocopying it for course pack? Are you going to use it online? How are you going to use it? And you can just go get a price for it, available for purchase, using print material for courses, and they let you use it. So that's another good way to go for print material. Copyright Clearance Center is for print material. And I use it fairly extensively in my department. We have 2 books that we use, and there's limits on the books. One of the books is 350 pages long, and we're allowed to use about 60 pages. And it costs us about $300 a year to do so. So that's okay. We think that's great. For $300 a year, our students have, quote, free material to use. The Spanish department uses a book called Todo lo que brilla, and it's licensed they had to buy 40 of the books, and then they got a license to be able to use photocopies of that, basically for perpetual. There are readers that people put together, accretions, that have little bits out of many, many stories. And so you can go to Copyright Clearance Center to get some of that. Turbo Squid is a great example, though, where let's just go look for a 3D model of a castle. I don't know. There's a castle. And if we go for 124 bucks, we can buy it, and it will tell you what we're allowed to do with it. It'll tell you when you download it what your licensing rights are for it. What can you do with it? And most of these ones that you go and purchase, you can use as a derivative in your own work. Okay. So that's kind of a cool thing. Whenever you get something, you have to look at the licensing availability. So that's the short about all of this. That when you use some work that you've gotten from somebody, if you bought it, be sure that you tell us where the license is. If you take a snip of it, be sure you tell us where that license was that allowed you to do that. And of course, if you created it on your own, you should know that we give unrestricted license. We don't even require attribution for anything that was created by the Design Hub, which means that you also can use your own work, and you can make a derivative of it that you can claim some rights to. So let's look, though. We are a school, and there are some allowances for educational product. Now, by and large, this gets totally abused. People say, I'm a teacher, so I'm just going to reprint this book. No. That book was published. There was effort. There are authors that are hoping to get some monetization off of it. You don't get to do that. But there are some things that you can do. You can use a small part. So as an example, I could use 60 pages out of this book that I use in my department. So you must utilize only a small part of the original work. So if I was going to use, let's say, somebody's cool artwork, Gary Larson, there's somebody. He does really funny cartoons. And I'm going to use a piece of his artwork in the background of a Minecraft thing. And I'm just going to stick a little picture of one of his cartoons on the wall. Well, that gets a little iffy because I'm using all of his cartoon and sticking it on the wall. Okay? So that's not a small part. It's a small part of what I'm doing, which we'll talk about in a moment. That's under accretion. But that was not a small part of the original work. Now, if I did take one part of a drawing and I use one part of a drawing, then I can do it. Or if I take a drawing that's got lots of great color and lots of this and lots of that, and I use a small part of it. I use the upper right-hand corner, and I just use the eyeball to do something of mine. Then you can do that. But in addition, and it must prompt a learning activity that is more than or different than the original. So if I'm doing something and I've got an image and a picture and I just say, okay, everybody copy that. That's not educational use. That's not more than or different than the original. I'm truly getting my students to make a copy. But if I also teach a process in 2 or 3 methods and some of this and some of this and some of this, now all of a sudden it's more and different than the original because it's part of a large presentation that has lots of parts to it. But even with that, it must not detract from the owner's ability to monetize their intellectual property. If that thing is for sale and normally gets paid for, and many people use it and pay for a license, you don't get to just say, I'm a teacher, I get to use it. That's a no-no. Okay? It's often done, but it's a no-no. All right? So that's educational. Now, along with educational often uses this accretion method, but accretion means when you bring lots of different things together to make a brand new thing. Okay? So a large set of small changes can be an accretion. If I've got the Mona Lisa and I pixelize it and I do some sort of cool mathematical function that makes the inside pixels bigger and the outside pixels smaller, and I invert all the colors. See, all of a sudden, it's something that truly is different. It's a different thing, even though it started with the Mona Lisa. So I can make a large set of small changes so that my new product is substantially different than the original. And so some things that change, and you've got to do a lot of these things. You can't just do one. But size, aspect ratio, local stretch or magnification. I'll tell you, part of this is if you're looking at it and you draw your own version and it is truly artistically different. Now, what does that mean? I'm a mechanical engineer, so I don't really know. But if it's artistically different, that's usually a different style or something is emphasized different. Okay? And that would be like size, aspect ratio, local stretch or magnification, color mapping, clarity, number of lines. I've made it more simple. I've made it more complex. If you're using a portion of the work, I'm using just the fingertip. Artistic additions or subtractions. If you've got this cool idea that starts from something, you're allowed to add to it. And sometimes you make it different by subtracting from it. So you do get to do that. And then addition of text, which provides a new or different meaning to the work. This has a lot to do with freedom of speech and comics and satiric works, things like that. But memes are a great example. So often, you see a picture and somebody gets a takedown request, but no, they've added something that really makes you think in a different way, or makes you laugh, or makes you chuckle, or makes you mad. Memes can make you mad too. If it elicits a different response than what the original author might have intended. Now, some authors or artists are so good that their work does elicit different responses. So you can't really just hang on that. But that's one of the things that you can do. So there you go. Those are some of the things that you can do for accretion. If you do accretion and really work on educational, that's good. Here's the design hub philosophy. If somebody could make money, we should pay them. We want to pay them. We think that that's supporting creativity. We think that that's supporting good ideas. We think that's supporting the effort of people to turn their thoughts and their intellect into a living. So wherever we can, we want to try to spend some money. However, we also want our interns to develop the skills to do it themselves. So sometimes we'll just say, no, go build it yourself. And of course, if we see that there's something that's just perfect, that's free, we'll go after it. We do not have an unlimited budget. Our budget has been hammered. So the freebie thing is better and better and better. But really and truly, let's think about trying to support authors and artists and musicians and writers and just people trying to develop their skill and get a little money off of it. Okay, so there we go. That's what we've got for this week. Next week we'll talk a little bit about the Americans with Disability Act.